everybody, and welcome everybody to the University of Dallas World Orientation Week. This afternoon, I would like to reflect with you all on what it means to travel abroad. Specifically, I would like to focus my attention on how you can have a positive and rewarding cross-cultural journey. To travel abroad is a unique and formative and cultural experience. In the age of globalization, we are all exposed to different countries, cultures, and people that communicate with one another. To travel and to sojourn in Italy will not be an exception. In fact, you will be exposed to one of the richest cultural heritage in the world, with its own identity, values, and customs. You will be able not only to travel, but also to live in Italy, and to experience the Italian culture.
You're good.
Can I have to...
I will do it.
Thank you. Otherwise, I take it. Experience the Italian culture. By saying these words, the majority of you are already thinking how exciting this experience will be for you. You will be strolling in the Via del Centro in downtown Rome. After a long day spent with your friends and professors, visiting museums, monuments, churches of the Città Eterna, you will discover new neighborhoods of Rome, like Trastevere, for example, and its trattoria, where you will taste traditional pasta dishes like pasta alla matriciana, pasta cacio e pepe, and at the end of the meal, you will have a strong Italian espresso, and you will be living the Italian dolce vita. But being Italian, let me ask you a couple of questions. Does this picture symbolically represent all what the Italian culture has to offer? Does this picture represent what tourists and foreigners living in Italy will remember of my country? And I think that in order to have a successful cross-cultural journey, we should ask ourselves the following questions before packing our luggage. And I would like that together we reflect upon this question. What does it mean to live abroad? What does it mean to live abroad in a cross-cultural dimension? Are there similarities and differences between the culture of the host country and our own? How can we overcome these cultural differences? Are we familiar with the core values of the host country? How can we get prepared for a cross-cultural journey? And the final question is, why do we need to ask ourselves all these questions before leaving? Why? Don't you agree with me that the modern means of mass communication and their instant accessibility have reduced the distance between different worlds? You just need to have access to your computer or your smartphone to have all the information you need about the country you're going to visit. So why is it still essential in 2013 to learn and to understand the differences in culture? Could we not just assume that in the world we're just different people and we accept this fact? Are we not already aware of what the definition and meaning of culture entail? And sometimes people, when they travel abroad, they start forgetting this definition of culture, the perceptual structure of human activities that includes behaviors, values, customs, beliefs, languages, rituals, manners, religious laws, morality of a particular country. So when you decide to leave, and I underline you decide, you choose to live in a foreign country, it is important for you to recognize the significance of the intercultural interactions and what these interactions will entail. This is the key to avoid misinterpretation, confusion, misunderstanding between two people who belong to different cultural backgrounds. So what is essential to a successful intercultural interaction is not to acknowledge the fact that we're different. We already know that. but is to understand and respect our cultural differences, and to be able to decode the invisible sources of the culture. And it is necessary also to emphasize and to remember the importance of the subcultures or the layers of cultures. In each culture, each individual will interact in a different way compared to another. As a consequence, it is even more essential in our intercultural interactions to keep all these factors into consideration to have a successful intercultural communication. So why it is so important to talk about cross-cultural communication when we live abroad? And I would like that we read, of course, the definition of cross-cultural communication. When we interact with or we try to compare two or more cultures and understanding their values, their beliefs, and their views. And in our modern global world, I would say that the practice and the understanding of how to communicate cross-culturally is even more essential, not only in the business world, but also when we travel and you sojourn abroad for a long period of time, like you're going to do. It is normal that after the first few interactions with Italian, you will discover some similarities, but also differences regarding manners, beliefs, norms, on how Italians really conceive and live their lives. You will be naturally inclined to compare your own culture and the Italian one. And being able to understand these differences will help you to have a positive intercultural exchange. So in a certain way, how can we communicate cross-culturally in a positive way? And some basic strategies, of course, will help us to start communicating cross-culturally in a positive and in an effective way. And I would like, of course, to emphasize some of them that for me are very important. Is, of course, you have to ask a lot of questions sometimes, even simple ones, okay, when we interact with a new culture. You have, of course, to listen actively. Of course, you have to start being flexible all the time. And especially, and I think those are two that are very important, are the respect the differences, and of course, to avoid stereotyping. So what does it mean to live abroad? It means to live across culture. You're going to adapt your behavior, your communication, your reaction to the host culture, to the language, to the new surroundings. You're going to develop what in cross-cultural study we say develop cross-cultural awareness. It means that you have to understand and appreciate the deep functioning of the culture of the host country. And of course, to help you out over here, if you see the picture, the culture is like an iceberg. So what you experience at the beginning when you arrive in a new culture, of course, you're going to encounter and going to experience what we call the visible behaviors. And you think that you're going to be immersed in the culture right away. But what you don't know yet and you're going to need to discover, this is your task, is to be able to decode, to understand the invisible sources, such as values, beliefs, and assumptions. And also you have to develop what we call the cross-cultural skills as well, to recognize the similarities and be able to react in a positive way to the differences of the host culture. So developing these cross-cultural skills and being able to identify the invisible sources, of course, that will lead you to a successful intercultural interaction. And as soon as we arrive in the host country, we start adjusting to our new environment and we start communicating with the locals. Or at least we try our best to do so. Verbal communication and body language are one of our first tools that help us communicating with locals when we are abroad. Even if we do not master the language, and I know some of you, of course, maybe don't know much Italian, of course, we're going to be able to use our verbal communication body language Of course, if we do not master the language, few basic sentences help us to get by. It is essential for us to remember that language is much more than conveying thoughts through grammar, structures, and vocabulary. And of course, this implies a lot of cultural competence. So by cultural competence, we have to keep in mind in our interaction when, where, how, and why we're saying and conveying our messages. If the language barrier can sometimes be an obstacle to our interaction, well, we can always rely on a positive, friendly attitude, using a relaxed body language to facilitate our exchange, of course, with our interlocutors. And so today I would like to share with you this photograph took in the city of Florence in 1951 by Ruth Orkin, an American photographer and photojournalist who in the same year, Life magazine sent on an assignment to Israel. From there, she went to Italy, and it was in Florence that she met a painter and a fellow American. One morning, the two were talking about their shared experiences, traveling alone as young single women, and they decided to go and took some picture in the city of Florence. In this first picture, Orkin photographed her friend while she was asking for directions. It looks like she's holding a map, a sort of an Italian guidebook that is helping her to discover what is around her. She's standing in the middle of the street. She's interacting with the Italian vigile, the traffic officer, who is giving her directions, pointing up his finger, using body language, along with explanations and directions. She's standing next to her bike. Of course, she starts behaving, or she thinks she is, as the people around her. And of course, we have the sensation that she starts feeling Italian among other Italians. She's discovering a new city. She's imitating the action of the locals, of course, and she's trying to converse with Italian people. So Orkin and her friend were experiencing that particular moment what can be defined in cross-cultural the explicit culture. That means that the sojourner experiences the concrete factors of the culture, what is there, what is tangible, and what is visible. The explicit culture can be not only a visit to a museum or to admire the architecture of monuments, but it extends also to verbal and non-verbal interaction with locals. And again, in this second picture, the explicit culture is displayed. Orkin photographed her friend while she was having a wonderful time in Florence, sitting in an outdoor cafe, talking and flirting with a man, not Italian, presumably an English speaker, fellow citizens of the southern region. And the rural and agricultural South is still linked to ancient customs and tradition. The southern regions have much more in common, of course, with Eastern Mediterranean and North African countries than Europe, as far as, of course, as location, landscape, and tradition. And people living in this region are usually very social, very interacting, very outgoing. So as you can say, of course, as you can see, there is a huge discrepancy of behaviors in a certain way that divide the northern Italians from the southern Italians. And as you know, of course, Italians communicate easily among each other thanks to the use of the standard Italian language. But the different dialects, and of course the map indicates all the dialects that are still used and they're still spoken in Italy, the different dialects or regional Italians are proudly spoken by inhabitants of each region. So each dialect is not considered just a linguistic and a communicative tool, but is a unique cultural identity feature of that particular part of the country in which inhabitants identify and proudly show their regional affinity and belonging. Well, despite our regional differences, Italians share common core values, such as, of course, family, friends, some of them, right? work, religion, quality of life, love for people. And I'm sure some of you say, well, but in America, we share the same core values. Don't you agree? You value your family and your friends. You have a very good work ethic. You're very religious. You want a very good quality of life as well. And you love, of course, beauty in both social and cultural aspects of everyday life. So, of course, here, the way, probably the fact that we belong to two different kind of model cultures, the way we live and we act upon certain kind of values are going to be inevitably different. So we share the same values, but the way we conceive and we live them are going to be, of course, a little bit different. And today I was just talking about that in one of my classes about, of course, the concept of il campanilismo, a very important aspect of life in Italy, symbolizing a sense of identity, of pride, and of belonging to the place of your birth. A feeling which is usually much stronger to an Italian than any sense of national identity. And in fact, you will see that an Italian will say, sono veneziano, I'm from Venice. Sono romano, I'm from Rome. Sono milanese, I'm from Milan. Before telling you, sono italiano, I'm Italian. So separate states and often fighting amongst themselves, each one with, of course, its own language and dialect and tradition, have always characterized the peninsula under, of course, until the year of the unification in 1861. The word campanilismo, which doesn't have really a specific English translation, derives from campanile, of course, the bell tower, and the campanile traditionally the tallest and the most prominent building in any town or village has become in the concept of campanilismo an enduring symbol of devotion and love of one region, city, town, and village, and even, of course, the quartiere, the small district of each town. So this day, despite this Italian political unification and the effects of mass media, which has to a certain extent, of course, put together and unify the Italian life, the concept of campanilismo continues to exist. And one of the common cultural characteristics of Italians, of course, is that they share and they use a lot of body language. They're known to be worldwide as excellent non-verbal communicators. So Italians tend to talk a lot, and we love to talk a lot and to interact. And they are considered, of course, because we are an affective culture. So to convey their ideas, not only they will use extensive vocabulary, hands and facial expression, but we try to make sure that we use the correct tone and pitch of voice. And sometimes we think that we want to be dramatic. Not really. We don't want to be dramatic. We want, of course, to share how we feel. So we will, of course, they will appeal and pick up to your generosity, warm heart, and good sense. So Italians in general tend to exhibit and not to separate, of course, the heart and the good sense. Emotions flow easily without any kind of inhibitions. So physical contact, gesturing, and animated expression are really common in Italy. And living in Italy, the travelers will hear the expression fare la bella figura. I'm sure that you have heard this from your professors or your friends. That translated into English like to make the best possible impression that you can do, but in different occasions. So along with this expression, we have another one that is farsi bello, farsi bella, that translates to make themselves look good. But fare bella figura, of course, and despite the common association of this expression to the love that Italians, of course, have for fashion and beauty in general, this expression goes beyond the art of dressing well. Fare la bella figura extends to your confidence and your style. It reflects your manners and your behavior. Okay, so it's not, of course, just to wear nice clothes. But to dress code is important, so to wear appropriate clothes helps you avoid, of course, giving the wrong signals. But usually beauty students are very good at that, so they're very problem for this. And so where we can witness this visible aspect of the Italian culture? In the numerous piazza all over Italy, that there are stages, of course, of the life of its inhabitants. And I don't know if you can recognize the first piazza over here. I know some of you that have been to Italy. Can you recognize this piazza? What is this piazza? Where exactly? Do you know where? So maybe some of you have an idea? No? This is Piazza del Campo in Siena, for example, in Tuscany. The second one, maybe is a little bit more popular, Piazza della Signoria in Florence, Firenze. This is, of course, the very popular one, Piazza di Spagna, or Rome. And do you recognize this one? Probably not. This is, of course, Piazza Ducale in Vigevano. It's a small little town near Milan, of course. And why I showed you these three different piazzas? Because in all the piazza, of course, and they're all displays this enclosed, open, urban space, is where you can witness the explicit visible culture, and you can start, in a certain way, observing some of the implicit cultural aspects of the people. But I would say that probably, away from all, allow me to say that, lots of tourists in the first three piazzas, more when you go, especially in small little towns, you're going to be exposed to the very authentic Italian life. So I would also encourage you, of course, to go to the very famous one and a very famous touristic destination, and I agree with you, but also I encourage you to also try to discover a little bit more about Italy and what Italy has to offer, of course. Because in every piazza, as we've seen before, the tower bell beats the time. And in Italy, time is viewed as synchronic, where the past, present, and future are interrelated so that ideas of the future and memories of the past, they shape the present actions. So Italians, like other cultures that share this conception of time, do not give importance on punctuality, schedules, and agenda. Not that the passage, of course, of time is not important, but to give the time to people and sharing human interactions are much more important. Even this, of course, implies to change the schedule of your day. And of course, most neutral and linear culture, as yours, have a more sequential view of time. It is perceived more as a series of passing events. And in all culture, of course, the conception of time is affected all the time by the culture, because time is more as an idea rather than an object. And this influences, of course, how people in different culture plan and organize their activities and, of course, how they live their lives. So Italians show how they value people by giving their time, of course, their personal times. So to postpone, in a certain way, time where these human values and sequence of emotion are expressed, of course, for Italians, is a lack of care and sincerity. And of course, the last aspect that I want to share with you, il dolce far niente, the sweetness of doing nothing. So in this conception of time, of course, this expression, dolce far niente, has become one of the most popular cultural definitions linked to this idea of Italian dolce vita. And sometimes in the linear culture, or also in the United States, well, this expression more would refer to killing time and more as have a negative connotation, a crude and brutal term, of course. But despite the expression, could lead, of course, for foreigners to think that Italians are kind of lazy, we like doing nothing. For Italians, this expression assumes a positive connotation all over, of course, the peninsula. This expression not only reminds us the joy of living and sharing life with one another, but implies also the delight and the, of course, being spontaneous on how we do things for just the pleasure of doing it. So it means to, in a certain way, to let your senses be the guide, be immersed in the place you live, and actually be impressed by these non-planned aspects and activities that you are in. So in a certain way, Italians have taken il dolce far niente as an art form. And in conclusion, of course, of this journey, in this approach of Italian culture, we could say that groups of people organize themselves in such a way that to increase, of course, affecting their way of living. Different groups of people have developed, of course, in different geographic regions, and they have formed different sets of logical assumptions. So after the first approach and recognition of the explicit culture, of course, travelers should note the assumption and values upon which one's cultural behavior rests. Then they must be able to contrast these assumptions and values with those of the host culture and discover the areas of cultural differences that are relevant to that particular situation. So this mutual knowledge and understanding of relevant cultural differences can be used really to create a common ground for a successful intercultural communication and, of course, to enrich your cross-cultural journey. And so as I tell you all, buon viaggio, have a wonderful trip, be safe, and enjoy.